Happy day everyone. Today's topic is Introduction to Abnormal Behavior. In this class, we will be looking at the indicators of abnormality, what are the different manuals that help us to understand what the different classifications of these abnormal behaviors are, and why is this classification necessary, and what could be the possible advantages and disadvantages of this. In order to understand abnormality, we don't have a particular definition which is fixed. Different researchers have different views of abnormality, and hence we do not have a fixed definition. We, however, can have a few indicators which can possibly tell us what abnormality is. The first indicator of abnormality is subjective distress. In this, the person undergoes severe psychological distress, and not only that, they can also provide distress to their family members or their closest ones. For example, a person undergoing depression can have self-deprecating thoughts which can produce a lot of distress to that individual. Similarly, a person who has psychotic symptoms can provide significant distress to the family members or their friends. However, this indicator in itself does not say that it is an abnormal behavior. It is not a sufficient factor to conclude that a particular behavior is abnormal. However, it can contribute to the factor that such a behavior can be abnormal. The second indicator of abnormality is maladaptiveness. In this, the person shows a significant level of maladaptive behavior. For example, a person who has anorexia nervosa can restrict the amount of food that they are taking to such a level that they have to get hospitalized. This is a maladaptive behavior, and like we saw in the first indicator, it also causes a level of distress to the person. In this case, we can consider this particular behavior to be abnormal. The third indicator of abnormality is statistical deviance. Statistical deviance is nothing but away from the normal. Now let us say that a particular behavior or a particular condition is statistically rare. Does that mean that behavior is abnormal? No. A condition can be statistically rare, but it can also be desirable. For example, a child who is intellectually gifted. This is not a condition that is undesirable, and hence we will not say that it is abnormal. However, let's look at intellectual disability. It is also a statistically rare condition, but it is highly undesirable. Hence, we consider that behavior or a condition to be abnormal. Moving on to the next indicator of abnormality, violation of the standards of the society. So, all societies have a fixed set of rules and regulations. Sometimes it is written as laws. When people violate such standards, not always is it considered to be abnormal. For example, people very often park their vehicles in a no parking spot. We don't say that the behavior is abnormal and that the person has a condition. However, certain rules, when violated, can cause abnormality. The next indicator of abnormality is social discomfort. Talking about the rules and the laws in the previous indicator, violating these can also cause discomfort to the people around us. So, when such discomfort arises to the people around us, for example, a person can cause harm to other people by trying to persuade them to buy something which is highly undesirable. So, this is causing a lot of social discomfort. In this case, we can consider the behavior to be abnormal. However, whether we would consider this to be a mental disorder is a question. Moving on to the next indicator of abnormality is dangerousness. This is also a continuation of the social discomfort that we discussed earlier. If the particular condition or the behavior is causing harm to the individual themselves, for example, as in depression, a person can have a lot of self-harming behavior. The person can cut themselves, the person can have suicidal thoughts which can ultimately lead to suicide. In this case, there's a lot of danger that is posed to the individual. Similarly, a person who has a psychotic condition can behave in dangerous ways which can harm the other people around them. So, in this case, we will consider the behavior to be abnormal. The next indicator of abnormality is irrationality and unpredictability. Not all behavior that is unpredictable will be considered to be abnormal. However, in conditions like schizophrenia, people can behave in ways where it doesn't make any sense to the people around them. They can tell things which does not make any sense. The speech will not be coherent. It will be highly irrational. So, such conditions, when the behavior or the speech or the thinking patterns are highly irrational or unpredictable, then we say that the particular behavior or condition is abnormal. Moving on to the manuals for the classification of abnormality. In psychology, we call abnormality or we diagnose abnormality as a mental disorder, a psychological disorder? We have two different manuals that gives us certain classifications of these psychological disorders. The first one is the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. This was published in 2013 and this was given by the American Psychiatric Association. The next manual of mental disorders is ICD-10. However, this manual does not just talk about the mental disorders but also has a classification of all the disorders. A particular amount of pages is allotted for mental disorders as such. There is not much difference in the classification with the two manuals. However, the coding becomes different. Now, is this kind of classification good or bad? Like in any other condition, there are pros and cons for classification of mental disorders as well. First, the advantages. We all get to have a proper nomenclature for the different conditions. Grouping the symptoms together is not going to lead us anywhere. Having a proper nomenclature can help different clinicians come together and discuss a particular condition and help us to treat the particular condition in a proper way. So, moving on to the advantages of classification. First, it allows us to have a proper nomenclature. Different clinicians can come together and discuss about a particular condition without having to discuss the entire symptom list. They can have a proper name for each disorder and helps them to treat the condition better. The second advantage of classification is that it helps them to structure the information. When we have a group of symptoms, there can be overlap sometimes in different conditions. This can be very confusing. Having to structure the information is very necessary in order to understand the disorder better and also to treat the condition. Therefore, classification helps us to structure information in a much better way. However, there are disadvantages to classification as well. Every individual is different and every people have their own characteristics. Having a common list of symptoms and diagnosing them to have something is not going to tell us the whole story. The person can have their own family history, the person can have their own personality traits, all of which also has to be analyzed before we diagnose the person. Therefore, having such classification systems can maybe stop us from understanding the person as an individual. Therefore, there is a loss of information happening here. The second disadvantage, as you already might have guessed, is the stigma attached to psychological disorders. A person having depression, if they become vulnerable and share it to someone, the other person is obviously going to stigmatize them. They might expect them to behave in certain ways. They might even become scared with people who have a psychological condition. So, such stigma is a major disadvantage of classification. And another disadvantage is stereotyping. We all have a certain fixed set of rules by which we expect the people who have a mental disorder to behave as. However, this is not true. People with different conditions behave in different ways. Such stereotyping can happen when there is classification. Hence, that is a major disadvantage for this type of classification. And the final disadvantage is labeling. Once the person is diagnosed with a condition, for example, let us say anorexia nervosa. If you are someone who watches Netflix a lot, you would have watched the series Never Have I Ever. The person there is being labeled as anorexic instead of telling that the person had anorexia nervosa. So, such labeling can cause more distress to the individual apart from the condition in itself. This is one of the other disadvantages that classification can lead to. To conclude, we should always keep in mind that such diagnostic classification will help us to identify what condition a person has and not what a person is. In this class, we saw what abnormality is, what are the different indicators that helps us identify an abnormal behavior, what are the different manuals we have in order to classify the disorders, and whether such type of classification is good or not. I hope you all had a good session. Thank you for listening.